Okay, so welcome to this fifth session of the software development training. Today we're gonna look at a more soft skills aspect of being a developer. Okay, we're gonna talk about Agile Scrum, and we're gonna talk about source control or version control. Okay, with Git. Um, we're gonna first talk about Scrum because when we get to source control, some things will make more sense there, right? Once you understand the methodology. For today and tomorrow, it's going to be more about the practical aspects, like real work life aspects of working as a developer. And we're not going to touch JavaScript at all, or maybe a little, just to demonstrate source control. But beyond that, we're not going to learn any new concepts in JavaScript. But like I mentioned, tomorrow afternoon at noon, if you're willing and if you're able to, let's have a nice fun session of just writing JavaScript, solving problems. I'm going to offer some problems to be solved. You can offer up problems, like let's make it real life. Let's make it less abstract. So that'll be from noon till about 3 p.m. tomorrow, and then at 6 we'll still have the regularly scheduled class. So if you have the availability and the time, please join at noon, and we'll make it real. All right. So let's talk about Agile Scrum in practice. And I did add the in practice there because Scrum is a framework that a lot of companies and a lot of organizations still struggle with. So for a bit of my background, I'm a certified professional Scrum developer and I'm a certified professional Scrum master. And what that means is that I have the demonstrated ability to develop in a Scrum environment, but I also have the demonstrated ability to lead a Scrum team and help them practice good Agile Scrum. Now, what is Scrum? And Scrum is important because when you start working as a developer, it is important to understand how to work as part of a team. You can't be a solo developer in a company, right? You can't hoard knowledge or hoard ideas or solve solutions. There are no heroes on the Scrum team. There are no champions, right? There's what we call a cowboy developer, and if they call you a cowboy developer, that's not a good term. That means you don't know how to work with others, right? And it is very, very important. As you go through, you will see why working as part of the team is very important. Now, Scrum is the most popular development framework today. And it is a framework, right, for developing and sustaining complex products. If you look at some of the software and the tools that you use on a daily basis, Facebook, GitHub, sorry, not GitHub, Gmail, right, Twitter, the teams that develop that, for the most part, actually use Scrum as the framework. Now, it is a framework and not a methodology, which means it gives you the structure around your team and around your processes, but you implement more to detail based on your team. So there are different options for different things, right? But it is a framework for developing complex products. Most teams that you will join as a developer either are trying to adopt Scrum or are already in Scrum, right? And it is fast growing. So if you go for a job interview with Scrum knowledge and understanding and background, you're very attractive because that's a little less training they have to do or a little less culture change they have to do for you. So let's talk through it. Here. So the Scrum framework, right, is based around different pieces. There's what's called the product backlog, which is essentially the requirements, the desire for the product being built, right? So, like I said, on this training, we're actually going to work on a project. And so the different pieces, the different requirements that we need for that project we'll work on will make up the product backlog. Think of the pieces as, maybe a login form, a sign-up sheet, right? A classroom. Those are different pieces that we're going to need. Um, those make up the product backlog. Now, I like to use the analogy of building a house for building software, but there are key differences between building software in an agile environment from building a house in real life, right? When you want to build a house is made up of multiple different pieces brought together, right? You have a door, you have many doors, you have a window, you have many windows, you have walls, you have bathrooms. In the bathrooms, you have toilets, and you have the bathtub, and you have the appliances and the kitchen. Those are all individual pieces made by different people or different companies, and then assembled together to give you a house, right? That analogy is typically how software is built. You build a lot of different pieces and connect them together. You don't have any software today that is one big giant file, right? There are lots of different individual programs that come together to give you the software that you want. And that's how software is built. Now, before Agile, the popular methodology that was in place was called waterfall. And waterfall is a methodology that is very akin to how houses are built, in that before you build a house, you go to an architect, you talk through it. The architect does drawings and does drawings and does drawings until the design is perfect. Then you have an engineer that takes that design and then converts it to structural engineering diagrams until it's perfect. And then you get the engineers to implement the diagrams. So you get the electricians to implement the wiring, and you get the construction engineer to build up the walls and everything, right? And then when those are perfect, then you get the painters in to come paint. And when that's perfect, then you buy furniture, you put it in, and when it's perfect, then you move it, right? That's how it is with building a house. But building software has changed. In the past, that's how we used to build software as well. We'd spend many months writing up requirement documents and drawing up architecture diagrams and documents and all that for how the software will work. And then when it's all done and together, then we get the developers and hand that document to them, and then they build. And then when they build the software, then we get a bunch of testers, and we toss the software we built to them and say, hey, test it and see what breaks. And they test and test and test, spend a few weeks testing, and then they come back with a whole list of bugs and pass it back to the developers. That's a very, very linear process. By the time you go from having the idea to having the software, it could be a matter of years, right? It could have taken 2 years, 3 years, but in some cases 4 years actually before you have a product to ship to the public. But based on how technology moves today, that is way too expensive. But also, by the time your product is ready, it's probably already obsolete. Because 4 years in today's world is a very, very long time. So we now have a framework called Agile that thinks about it differently. In the Agile world, you don't have a requirement document. You don't wait until you've defined exactly how everything will work before you start building. You start building as quickly as possible so that you can get something in front of people as quickly as possible, and you can correct your path as quickly as possible. So with Agile, you want to get feedback very quickly, and you want to fail very quickly. You don't want to spend months or years before realizing what you've been building is not desirable. You want to know in a month or in 2 months that it's not desirable. So you want to build pieces and iterate over the product and constantly add pieces, right? So it's like the analogy to building a house is that, okay, I know that I want a house with a 6-bedroom house, right? But I have many different choices for materials. So I build one room first and have the family move in and be like, okay, how's this room? They're like, yeah, we love the walls, we love the windows. Like, okay, I'll build 6 more rooms like that, right? And then I put in sockets, add the sockets, right? Okay, put in more sockets, Or if they're like, no, we don't like this room, tear it down. I've only spent the cost of one room rather than the whole house. Right? So coming back to the presentation, the product backlog is where all the different pieces are defined. Pieces that we will build, pieces that we don't know whether we will need, crazy ideas, brilliant ideas, they're put in the product backlog and then they're prioritized, right? And then we go through a process of actually planning the work. And then, we go into what's called a sprint backlog, which is actually a small set of work that we decided that we're going to do right now. We work on it. And I'll talk about all of these because these are going to be jargons for now. And then we iterate, right? And so on and so forth. I'll come back to this slide at the end so that we'll be able to look at this and understand it better. All right. Now, one of the great things about Scrum is that Scrum is simple, right? It is a framework and not a methodology, but it is difficult to master, especially for teams. If you've been working in a waterfall team with a project manager, switching to Scrum is difficult to master because a lot of the things you're used to will no longer work. But since most of us here are completely green, it's going to be simple for us to pick up, right? Because we don't have, bad habits to unlearn. Or they're bad habits in quotes because they're bad habits in the Scrum world, not in a waterfall or other methodologies. Right? Okay, Scrum is empirical. I've used this term a lot as we're learning. And I said that I was structuring the training around Scrum. And empirical means that you learn from experience. That's what empirical means, is that you learn from experience. You perform an action, you get experience, you improve how you do it. Like you figure out what you've done wrong, you figure out what you've done right, and then you correct. So Scrum, a big part of the Scrum methodology is to fail quickly, right? Learn and adapt quickly, right? It's part of why I say, ask questions. It's not like a stupid question, but it's better for it to be corrected immediately. And then, very early on, okay, that's not the right way to do it. So Scrum is empirical. Now, in a Scrum environment, the people come first. There are two things I'll say come first. So it may seem a little conflicting, but it makes sense. But Scrum is about the people, not the product. In a Scrum environment, the developers decide what they will deliver, right? It's very different from, waterfall or other environments where you have a project manager, and the project manager determines what is done when. In the Scrum environment, the developers determine what they will do. If they refuse to do it, it's not going to be done because it is focused around creating a happy team. There are many values in Scrum. One of the values, or one of the, it's not defined as a Scrum value, but it's defined as a Scrum culture, is having a sense of humor. You have to be able to laugh at yourselves and have fun and enjoy working together. So it's about the people, right? It's about working as a team. We say that we succeed as a team and we fail as a team. If everything breaks and all hell breaks loose, you don't say, hey, here's the one that did it. No, you don't point fingers. You talk about how to resolve it. It doesn't matter who got it wrong. We will all work together to resolve it as quickly as possible, right? So we succeed as a team, we fail as a team. The entire team is responsible for the product. Okay, so people come first. Now, another first right, is that quality, and this is now about the product, of all the features, quality is the most important thing. It's more important than what you actually build, right? It's more important that what you build works as intended, is, great quality. And so there's certain techniques that we will learn as part of this course for ensuring quality. We're going to learn test-driven development, and we're going to learn automation. Those are two keywords that if you go to an interview and you tell them you know TDD, or test-driven development, and you know automation, or you know CI/CD. CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous delivery, right? If you say those in an interview, you have a very, very, very high chance of getting that job and then being excited about you. But even better, if you can explain it and you can demonstrate it and say, look, I've worked on projects, where I've done that, and you can describe it, you're golden. So in this course, we're going to, as soon as possible, start learning how to do test-driven development, and that'll be our pattern for regular programs, okay? But it's important to know that quality comes first, and the entire team is responsible for quality. We don't have a test team, and we don't build and pass it on to testers, right? We build it to pass tests that already exist, which is why it's test-driven development. So everyone is responsible for quality. If there's a bug, we talk about it as a team and say, okay, how did we miss that? Okay? All right. And then we talk about this, the Scrum values. Before I go on, any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to make this real. This is conceptual, but we're going to practice this in this program. We're already practicing some little bits of it, but as we go on, we're going to practice it more, right? Remember, it's around working as a team. A Scrum team has collective intelligence, right? It's called a cross-functional team. So you may have some people who are better at certain things than others. You have people who are better at certain things than others. When you look at a Scrum team, you're not looking for who's good at testing and who's good at. You're looking at the team and say, oh, this team is good at testing and good at design and good at performance and good at, because there are people in the team who are good at those. So you look at the team as a whole, not for individuals, right? Now we look at Scrum values. Courage is a big value. That means you have the courage to tell the truth. You have the courage to take on, challenges, right? That's a big Scrum value. Focus is a big value. The team has to focus on a deliverable and an objective. And part of the framework actually set up to keep the team from being distracted. So if we say we're building, in this sprint, we're building a login system. The team is focused on that and have committed to delivering a login system in that sprint. A sprint is a 2-week time period. We'll talk about that soon. But they're focused on that. And the framework is designed so that someone is not coming to say, hey, can you build this instead? Whoever is coming, the role of the Scrum Master is to say, back off. Let's talk about it. Maybe we'll plan it for future work. But right now, the team is trying to deliver something. Okay? Commitment. Commitment means keeping your word, keeping your promises. Right? It means if you as a developer say, I'm going to deliver this sprint, or rather, now you have to remember that we're talking as a team. The Scrum team says we're going to deliver this functionality in this sprint. They're working to deliver that functionality. That's commitment. And at the end of the sprint, they should deliver on that commitment.
This is all you're doing.
Okay?
This is which one?
And then respect. the, there's no job titles, right, on the Scrum team. Everyone is a team member. Even the Scrum Master is a team member. His role is a Scrum Master, but he's a member of the team. But it's important to have respect for each other, right? So one of the values is you have to deal with team members with respect. And then there's openness. You have to be honest with each other, right? That is the way you correct mistakes made. So when there's a problem, you respectfully and courageously be open, right? You say, hey, we waste too much time in meetings and it is costing us, right? So, respectfully, I think we should spend less time in meetings and more time actually writing code. That's a Scrum plan. But you don't go and say, yeah, you are so stupid, you don't even know what we're saying in meetings and all that. No, right? You have to be respectful, but you have to be open, right? There's a part of the Scrum framework that allows for that openness. So let's jump in. And there's a chart of this. All of this is online. These documents are available. Scrum.org is there to offers in-depth training for Scrum and the certification. But these are the values that I talked about. There's a chart of this. Okay. I'll share this chart in Slack. In a few places that I've worked, we actually have this printed huge and put on the wall so that everyone remembers. But you have courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. Set a Scrum values. Okay? And these are values that are expected that you take to the job as a developer. All right. So, any questions so far? Comments? Confusion? Or lack thereof?
I have a question on
Yes.
because I've seen a few people that look for, I guess, Scrum Masters.
Mm-hmm.
What is the is there a big demand for Scrum Masters, or it's just to know the framework that is more important versus the certification?
That's a good question. And right here in 2 steps, we will get to Scrum roles. And so we'll talk about the only 3 roles. So we'll talk about them and I'll explain that.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So let's talk about the pillars and then we'll jump ahead. So there are 3 pillars of Scrum. Now we've talked about the values, right? But they are what we call the 3 pillars of Scrum. And they're the reason that Scrum has become so much more popular, right? The pillars that we have the pillar of transparency, we have inspection, and we have adaptation, okay? Transparency means that what you do, right, is visible to the client, right? It's visible to the product owner. You're not working on anything in secret, right? Open, honest communication and visibility into progress, challenges, failures, and successes. In Scrum, if you screw up, you say, hey, I screwed up. If you're talking to the client and there's a bug, you say, hey, we've done this, but there's a bug here, and you show the bug, right? You don't hide the bug and say, hey, we hope they don't notice, right? A big pillar is transparency. You have to be open and honest, and you have to, let the clients know, even the customers. So you will see that, I don't know if anyone has noticed, but sometimes when you download software or you buy software, you see a list of known bugs, right? Has anyone noticed that? Or if you download an update,
Yes.
the update will say known bugs.
Yeah, I had to contact a company because I noticed there are differences between the output of an Android versus an iPhone, and they quickly got back to me and kind of started explaining what the issues were. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So transparency. Just say, admit that, okay, you know what, we totally screwed up here and we're going to fix it. Right. So that's one big pillar of Scrum. Okay. Open, honest communication and visibility into progress, challenges, failures, and successes. Now, another pillar is inspection, right? And in the inspection pillar is a regular review, right, of the product and processes with the goal of improving them. So Scrum work is split up into very short timelines, and every iteration, we call them iterations, and every iteration, you have a meeting called a retrospective where you talk about how that iteration went. What did we do well? What did we do terribly? What do we need to improve on, right? In some, there are different patterns for it. You can say, what should we stop doing? What should we keep doing? What should we start doing, right? You look at the software you're building and you're like, okay, we built this feature. Yeah, it totally isn't delivering what we thought, or it's not worth it, or people just hate it. How do we fix it and make users love it, right? So that is what inspection is about. Not just the product, but also the processes. If the team is unhappy, talk about it. Why you guys are unhappy? They're like, we're overworked. We need to take a break. Okay, talk about it and you fix it. Okay, so that's inspection. And then the third pillar is adaptation, right? That's when you take the input from inspection, right, and you make changes. That's adaptation. You take the feedback from the users, take the feedback from the team, you take that input and then you make changes to your processes or the product. Because the goal with Scrum is to, can we please all stay on mute? All right. The goal with Scrum is to constantly improve the product, constantly improve the processes. Right? That's the goal with Scrum. So that's what adaptation is. So those are the three pillars. Transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Okay, we're going to practice all those in this course. We're going to use them starting tomorrow, actually. Okay. Now let's talk about Scrum roles. Like I mentioned earlier, there are no job titles on the Scrum team. Everyone is a team member. There are roles, right? There are roles, and those roles are targeted towards specific functions. But there are no job titles. You don't have, a boss and subordinates in a Scrum team. Okay? Everyone is a team player. Everyone is a team member. And everyone is helping the team succeed. No one's calling the shots. For me, I'm typically a very alpha person. So I'm the person that likes to go in and boss everybody around. But when you're in the Scrum team, you gotta suck that up and just play with the team, right? But yeah, there are specific roles, and I'll talk through them. One role that's a big deal is the product owner. The product owner is typically a non-technical person, usually the client. They're usually on the business side of things, and they're responsible for what parts or what features of the software deliver the most business value. So the product owner interacts with stakeholders and users, figures out what they need, what they want, and all that, and then presents them to the development team as user stories. So the product owner is responsible for the what. Okay. So the statement I have here is a product owner is responsible for maximizing the value of the product, right, resulting from the work of the development team. So that's the job of the product owner. They have their finger on the pulse of the business and they know what's good. As far as the software is concerned, they know what's the hottest feature. For us as technical people, we usually want to do the coolest things, but the coolest things are not always the most necessary things. I want to write software that's going to read people's minds. Yeah, but people don't want their minds read. So the product owner is there to say, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fantastic, but that's not our priority right now. They don't want their minds read. They want to type out what they want. You know what I mean? So that's the role of the product owner. And the product owner is the one who accepts the work done by the development team. So the way I like to think about it is that as a developer, the product owner is my customer, right? And the customer is always right. So the product owner says, well, I don't want that, then there's no point in me building it. Okay? The next role is the development team. Everyone else that's technical is a member of the development team. The development team is responsible for actually doing the work, right, of delivering a potentially releasable increment of done product at the end of each sprint. We'll talk about what that means. It's Greek right now, but it actually means something specific. It means that the product owner has the dreams, right? That's the ideas, knows what will deliver value. The development team knows how to get it done. And the development team is responsible for getting it done and delivering it, right? They provide the technical expertise. Now, development team members may have different strengths and different weaknesses. Like some people may be better at UI design, and some may be better at database design or database development or test, automation. But together, you can bring all those your different skills and abilities together to deliver the product. That is part of why, even though in this training, we have 3 different tracks and 3 different squads, the 3 squads are going to work together to actually deliver on the project, right? That'll give us the ability to see how, okay, you have to actually interact with other skill sets and negotiate. Someone working on the front-end squad will have to interact with someone working on the back-end squad because they need an API that the back-end squad guys can deliver for their front-end to work. So you're going to have to be able to talk and say, okay, let's agree on a signature. Still Greek, but it will mean something as we go along. But they come together, agree on an API signature, and the backend guy will go build the API to deliver that signature. The front-end guy will go build, expecting that signature. But a development team will have different skill sets. In Scrum, it's important that a development team is a cross-functional team, which means you can perform many different actions within the team without having to go outside of the team. Okay? And then the third and final role, and there are only 3 roles, is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is not a project manager. So the Scrum Master is not anybody's boss, right? You will see the ads for jobs for Scrum Master. Scrum Masters are very well paid because they know Scrum and they can help the team do better Scrum. Not because they're a manager or because they're, right? So it's different from a project manager. Now, a Scrum Master is responsible for promoting and supporting Scrum by helping everyone understand Scrum theory, practices, rules, and values. So the Scrum Master's job, the Scrum Master is what's called a servant leader, right? is that even though you're leading the team in Scrum, you're there to help them, do better Scrum rather than beat them over the head with a bat every time they get it wrong. Ugh, you don't do this. No, it's more like, okay, good attempt. Let's try this again, but let's do it this way. Or this is how we should be. So the Scrum Master helps coach the team, guides the team, and helps them understand Scrum better. So you typically need decent people skills for Scrum. To be a Scrum Master, you typically need decent people's skills, and you need to also be very methodical, right? You have to have the ability to say, okay, these are the standards, and I'm looking out to make sure we adhere to these standards. The beauty of Scrum is its simplicity. You can see the only 3 roles. There's not too much else around the roles, right? But that's also where people make a lot of mistakes because they remix it too much or introduce too much waterfall, so you end up with Scrum fall or Scrum fail, like we like call it. Right? So the Scrum Master's role is to make sure the framework is being used effectively. Now, the values to the business of good Scrum are immense. There's very little waste. Like businesses and software companies that go with Agile Scrum waste very little money because everything you build has been determined as needed and delivering business value. And you typically also have a much quicker time to market, right? Which means from when you think about an idea to when you actually launch it and start making returns on it, it's a very short time. So you have a much quicker time to market. You have a much less likelihood of delivering a product that's obsolete or that people don't even like or want, right? That's one of the beauties of Scrum. And the Scrum Master, the reason they're well paid is because if you're a good Scrum Master, you will deliver a lot of value to the business. Now, a developer can be a Scrum Master. Anybody can be a Scrum Master. So you can be now you typically cannot be a Scrum Master and a product owner. And there's reasons for that. You typically want to separate those roles. You can be a development team member and a Scrum Master, right? And that usually is the case. But you typically will not be a product owner and Scrum Master because you will end up becoming a project manager. You will maneuver Scrum to force the team to deliver what you want where you want it, whether or not it's the best Scrum. Okay. All right. Scrum ceremonies. Before I jump on into this, any questions so far? And did I answer your question about the Scrum Master?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah, please, who determines the methodology to be used? Is it the company or the employee?
Usually, the company determines the methodology, right? But very often it's someone in the company that pushes for Scrum, right? And I've worked in a few places where I've helped them move to Scrum. So in 2014, I did a 3-month contract for the American Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC. And literally my contract was to help them adopt Scrum, right? Both from the business perspective, but from the development perspective. So it was to help their Scrum Master, their project managers switch to Scrum Masters and help the developers become Scrum developers. But that was a push that came up because they have over 140 different software that the AMC. The AMC is responsible for MCATs and USM. I think they're responsible for USMLEs, but anything related to medical certifications and education, AAMC is the one that does all that examination. So they have a whole lot of software, and they realize that they are no longer just an organization. They're actually more of a software company than an organization. So they chose to move to Scrum and be a lot more agile, right? And it worked for them. So
Okay.
that decision can come from management, from leadership. They could go for a conference somewhere and all their competitors are talking about Scrum and they come back one day and say, hey, you know what, we need to go Agile Scrum. Everybody's doing that stuff now, you know. It could
Okay,
come like
yeah.
that, yeah.
My
Or you
okay.
could go in as a developer with Scrum experience and be like, okay, you know, these problems you're having would go away if we adopted Agile Scrum, and you make a case for it and you sell it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Don't you think it's going to require a lot of rework? Because what I'm used to is when you document your requirements and you pass through approvals and all, we all agreed on what to do, you know, instead of reiterating, doing it all over again. It's
Right.
going
So in practice, Scrum actually requires less rework than Waterfall, because the risk with your requirements is that your requirements may be good today, but in a year's time, they're no longer good because policies have changed, procedures have changed, the laws have changed. So what you spent all that time developing and you thought was awesome, by the time you deliver it, it's obsolete, so you have to rework it. The difference with Scrum is that you build iteratively, right? So you build for the requirement at that time and you deliver for the requirement at that time. When you're delivering, it is still valid. So you can actually go through the whole software development life cycle in 1 week or in 2 weeks for a particular piece, and you work piece by piece by piece by piece. It's like you building a house, right? And you know you want to put in a furnace, right? A heating system or AC. And at the time they're designing the house, the electricity system in that area is 240 volts. But in 1 year, they've changed everything to 120 volts. And you spent all that time designing for 240 volts, and then when it comes to build, and you want to buy your 240 volts AC, it's obsolete because they no longer make 240 volts ACs because everything's now 120 volts. You get what I mean? You now have to rework your designs and say, okay, let's redesign everything for 120 volts. Okay, so that's
yeah.
one of the things is that, which is why I said that Scrum reduces waste. It is very, very efficient. A big value of it is it reduces waste by a huge factor. Some projects save up to 75% by moving to Scrum. And when we start the practice, you will see how.
So how do you budget for it?
You don't budget for it like you do in Waterfall. But when we get to practice, and I'll talk about it as we start working on this project so you see how it works. And the government now is moving to Scrum pretty strictly, right? I did a project at Lockheed Martin for the government, and we had a Scrum and Agile assessment every quarter, and they actually had Agile Scrum experts embedded in the team examining us for 2 weeks. And it was part of the contract, it was part of the requirement from the government. And they would sit there for 2 weeks and score. And how much Lockheed Martin got paid was based on that assessment, right? And that's the government. Now, the DHS also, if you're doing projects for ICE, for USCIS, for DHS itself, most of their software projects now require you to be Agile Scrum. And part of the process of bidding for a project, and I've participated in many of these, is you have to do a tech challenge, right? And the tech challenge is you come in for 4 hours, the entire team, you come in with your Scrum team, maximum of 10 people. You have no clue what they're gonna, I mean, you have an idea of what they're gonna ask you to build, but you can't build anything in advance. And in 4 hours, you have to build what they ask you to build, right? So you come in and you sit down and they spend the first 30 minutes and they tell you, okay, here's what we're going to build. Here's a list of user stories. Apply Scrum process, and they're filming everything, filming your conversations, the questions you ask, the process, the ceremonies, how the team interacts. That's what they're looking for. And if you do, they score you based on your agile processes, the agile Scrum. And if your Scrum is tight, you win the contract. And the government has figured out how to pay those contracts now. Right? So now they do more time and material than, they may have a big budget, which is based on a certain max number of hours, but usually we find that those contracts are multi-year, 5-year, 10-year, extendable, right? Because they're now adopting a more agile approach. And part of the reason the government has adopted it was during that Obama administration, and it's still being pushed now because they found that there's a lot of waste on government contracts, especially the IT contracts. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this is probably developed from experience. How long did you have to, about how many projects did you have to go through to say, okay, now I'm comfortable being a Scrum manager, right? About how many did you have to do before you got to a comfort level of being able to say, okay, I think this is something I can do as a Scrum manager? Because I don't think it's something that's got a blueprint.
Right. Well, so it actually has a blueprint. Yes, it actually has a blueprint. There's the Scrum handbook. Now, it's not very big. It's only 16 pages or so. But there is also specific Scrum Master training, right? Now, you do need experience for it, right? But you can actually get that experience on one good Scrum project. If you're on a Scrum project, because remember, it's empirical, it's experiential. So it's something that you don't memorize, it's something that you learn to do. It becomes kind of like a way of life for you as a developer. When there's a scenario, you think about it in a particular way. I mean, as
so are there benchmarks? Like,
yes.
Okay, this is where you have to, okay, so how do we get those benchmarks?
Oh, you mean in terms of levels?
Yes.
Well, there's no levels to being a Scrum Master. There are levels of Scrum Masters, right? So you can be a Scrum Master 1, Scrum Master 2, Scrum Master 3, right? So if you work as a professional Scrum Master, then you're going to aspire to reach a Scrum Master 3. For like a Scrum Master 3, you need many years of experience dealing with different scenarios, because the questions in the certification exam are more, they almost seem like NBA questions, right? They're more experiential. Like it wouldn't be defined this. It would be like, okay, the team has a product they've been working on for 2 years and has management and they've invested so much and they have a budget, whatever. How would you convince them, or how would you help them move forward? You know what I mean? So it's questions like that. Or a developer is struggling and not delivering and whatever. How would you get the team to rally around that developer and improve their performance? Or how would you deal with that developer, right? From a Scrum perspective, So those are the kinds of things. But for something like that, you need multiple different projects and a lot of experience.
So basically, they're not defined.
No, they're not defined, but you have to pass the exam, right? There isn't a syllabus for it, because they expect you to have experienced it, right? Okay, all right, so let's move on through the ceremonies, because I have 10 minutes left for this, and then we'll break again for a few questions before we go to source control.
All right.
So this is the last large slide. Okay, so let's talk about the Scrum ceremonies. A key part of Scrum is its ceremonies, right? That's what's really important about it. We call them ceremonies, but those are the different, they are ceremonies. I can't try to think of a different word, like events that happen in the life cycle of the project, right? Those ceremonies are critical to delivering good Scrum, okay? A lot of companies will omit one or the other. All the Scrum ceremonies are important. And if you want to achieve the best results from Scrum, you do all the ceremonies. You don't skip any because they each have their purpose. So we'll talk through them, and then you understand what the ceremonies are and what their purpose is. So the first one is the backlog review. Remember we talked about the product backlog, which is essentially the wish list of different stories, essentially all the small pieces of requirements, right, that you want. Now the product backlog is a living backlog, which means, and anybody typically can put stuff in it. So if you're working on the product and you have an idea, you go write a story and toss it in the product backlog. The product owner is responsible for prioritizing their backlog, right? And making sure that what is worked on is priority. But anybody can put stuff in the product backlog. Now the backlog review is a meeting where the product owner and the development team get on the same page as to what's in the product backlog. So let's say I have a user story, right? And my user story is, as a user, I want to reset my password so that I can solve a login issue by myself without asking for help, right? That's the user story. The product owner in backlog review gets together with the team and says, okay, I have this user story. They talk about it. The team, they're like, okay, well, yeah, we need to check this, we need to check that. They refine the story. Now, on some teams, you hear this thing called backlog grooming, but for legal reasons, because the term grooming now has a negative connotation in terms of predators, right? It's now been changed to backlog review, not grooming, right? So this is the opportunity for the development team to hear about a feature that's going to be asked for and to provide feedback to the product owner so, you can refine that requirement. So the product owner may take the feedback from the team and go back to the stakeholders and say, okay, yeah, so how about this? Or, okay, we shouldn't do this because it will introduce a security issue. Or what about this? This is how, the developers may know a better way of doing it than what the product owner was asking for. So if you take it back and socialize that before the requirement is firm. So that's the backlog review meeting. Sprint planning. Now, a development team, a Scrum team usually does its work in what's called sprints. A sprint is a period of time, right? Either 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, right? Over which work is done. At the beginning of the sprint, there's a sprint planning where the development team and the product owner agree on what will be delivered in that 2-week period. Okay? And then at the end of the sprint, there's a sprint review where, again, the product owner and the development team, they look back at the last 2 weeks and assess how they did. That's the inspection. So they're like, okay, we plan to deliver 8 stories, we delivered 7, right? What do we need to do? It's also an opportunity to show off the work that's been done. So a part of the sprint planning in a lot of organizations is a demo of what's been built. So if you have good Scrum, you also want stakeholders to be there because you want them to see it. Even before you launch it, like you want people who are kind of representative because you want the developers to hear from them directly. And they say, oh, that button is green. I would have expected it to be red. It's very confusing being a green button when they tell me to cancel, right? That's something that the team may not have even considered, but the users will hate. Look at that, and the product owner may go and talk to some more users and realize it's a common feeling and put a story in to change that button from green to red, right? So the sprint planning is the beginning of a sprint. Remember, a sprint is a 2-week period. And like I said, in this training, if you remember the schedule, we're going to work in 2-week sprints. Okay? We work in 2-week sprints. The last day of each sprint, we'll have a review and plan the next one. And then we'll train for 2 weeks and work on stuff and all that. And then we'll come back at the end and talk about how it went. We'll have a retrospective. But let's look at the other activities so I don't get ahead of myself. The daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is a daily meeting. Like I mentioned as well, from next week, once we break into squads, every day we will start off with a daily meeting, a daily Scrum or a stand-up. And it is very short. In a real Scrum team, it's time boxed to 15 minutes. It cannot take more than 15 minutes. It's not allowed to run on for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour. If it does, that's bad Scrum. 15 minutes or less. If you can get it done in 5 minutes, you can get it done in 5 minutes. But the purpose of the meeting is for the team to be brought up to speed as to what each person has achieved and any challenges they may have, right? Only the development team is required to attend the daily Scrum. The product owner is not required, the Scrum Master is not required, right? But what you do is you come in and you talk about what you worked on yesterday or what you delivered yesterday, what you plan to deliver today, and any blockers, any obstacles you have to deliver. It's very, very simple. No questions allowed. If anybody wants to discuss it, schedule a meeting after the daily Scrum with only the parties required. So if I say, okay, I'm working on this and whatever, and maybe Femi has a question, Femi is not going to ask the question and we hold everybody up while I'm answering and we're having a conversation. If Femi has a question, you say, I have a question, the Scrum Master says, okay, schedule, let's have a meeting after. That's part of the role of the Scrum Master, is to make sure they don't start discussing it. Now, if Femi's question has a 1-sentence answer, can give that 1-sentence answer right there, and that's done. But if it's going to be a conversation, you defer it, and then just me and Femi will meet. That's part of the efficiency part. We're not paying for 10 people's time for 2 people to have a conversation. And so that's the daily Scrum. What you did yesterday, what you're doing today, and any blockers, any challenges you have to delivering your commitments. Okay. And then we have the sprint review. I talked about that. It's an opportunity to inspect the sprint, right? And figure out how the team did. And then there's a retrospective. This is a critical meeting, right, in Scrum, because it's an opportunity, like I said, to talk about what you did well, what you did badly, and what you're not doing at all that you need to start doing. Right, so if your daily stand-ups or daily scrums are 20 minutes, talk about it in the retrospective. That's something you did badly that you need to change. Talk about it and make a commitment to change. And the very next sprint, you start implementing changes, right? And then the same thing, what did you do well? You celebrate your successes. We collaborated well, communication was great. We delivered all our commitments, all of that. You talk about it in the retrospective, you celebrate yourself. And then you're like, well, we're not doing this, we're not documenting. We should start documenting our code. We should start writing documentation and all that. That's what we need to start doing. Talk about it in the retrospective and make a commitment to start doing that, right? And that's it for the ceremonies. Now, one thing that's critical with Scrum is a sprint. The goal of a sprint is to deliver an increment of shippable software, which means the work you do in a sprint must be at a quality where if you want to deploy it to production, you want to make it public for people to start using, or you want to ship it, you can ship it. That's the goal. Now, do you always achieve that in practice? No. But you have to aim for that. Some teams achieve that all the time. If you have really good automation and you have a mature Scrum team, They will deliver a shippable increment every sprint. And you'll be able to release very often. I've worked on teams that release every day because we have full automation, we have continuous integration and continuous delivery. So every single day, there's a new version of the application out there. A lot of the software that we use actually release like that. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You go in the morning and you go in the evening and there's a new feature and you're like, where did this come from? Right? And sometimes in a day, there are 3 new features that show up. Some of them are more obvious than others. That's because they're agile and they have continuous delivery. Okay? We're going to push for that in this project is to get to a point where, we're just going to be, tossing it out. Okay? But the sprint is very important. It's a time frame that you commit to doing a certain amount of work and you focus on that work for that time period. And the goal is to deliver that work as a team. So if someone's struggling with what they're doing, other people jump in and help. They'll be like, well, I finished mine. That's it, No, there's no, if you're done, you jump in and help someone that's working on something else and deliver and help make it.
So for your, I have a question, Yinka.
Yes.
For your average team, about how many people are usually on the team?
So a Scrum team is limited to 10 people, right? There's an upper limit of 10 people. So there are limits. Right.
For like an intense project, about how many days have you gone on a project?
So I've done a project. I did a project for a VR company in Phoenix that lasted 4 sprints. From beginning to end was 4 sprints. They wanted to build a dynamic, like a CMS for VR, but they also had to deliver a product to Grant Thornton, right? So from the day I talked to them first and started the project to the day we delivered it to Grant Thornton was 8 weeks, 4 sprints, right? And there were 6 of us on that Scrum team, right? There were 6 people on the Scrum team. Now, I've also worked on very large projects, and what you have is you have multiple Scrum teams. So the project I worked on at Lockheed Martin had 4 Scrum teams. So that's 40 people, right? 4 Scrum teams. Each team has its own product owner and a development team, right? And Scrum Master, right? But then we had to have a Scrum of Scrums, kind of where, we bring cross-communication across the squads or across the teams. So that's a slightly different framework. It's called the Scaled Agile framework, but it's for when you have large projects where you have to have multiple Scrum teams. Okay? But in its purest form, a Scrum team is 10 people. 1 product owner, 1 Scrum Master, and 8 or 9 development team members. 8 or 9 because if the Scrum Master is also a development team member, then you have up to 9 of them. The Scrum meetings or Scrum ceremonies are time boxed. There's a time limit for every single one. So the sprint planning and the time limit depends on the size of the team or the length of the sprint. So if you're planning a 1-week sprint, the sprint planning is time boxed, I think, to 1 hour or 30 minutes. So I have to forget this stuff. 1 hour. If you're planning a 2-week sprint, the sprint planning is time boxed to 2 hours. A 3-week sprint, 3 hours. And if your Scrum is always time boxed to 15 minutes, can exceed 15 minutes. And then your sprint review is also time boxed based on the length of the sprint. A 1-week sprint, 30 minutes, a 2-week sprint, 1 hour. And then the retrospective is also time boxed based on the length of the sprint. So those rules help to maximize efficiency. If you have a time limit, you're not going to have unnecessarily long meetings and you spend a lot more time actually delivering that. Okay? And that is pretty much it. The only thing that I'll talk about is anti-patterns, and the biggest anti-pattern is for the Scrum Master versus Project Manager. And one of the biggest challenges is for project managers to become Scrum Masters, because a Scrum Master does not say what is worked on when. Project managers usually tell the team what to work on. They have a Gantt chart and they have milestones and all that. And Scrum doesn't have that. So it's usually an anti-pattern to go into Scrum with a project manager mindset, because we don't have milestones and deliverables and dates defined into the future, right? In Scrum, you may have releases, but you don't have milestones, and the Scrum Master has no input whatsoever on when anything is delivered. The Scrum Master's role is just to help the team make the right decisions. It's to facilitate the conversation, facilitate the mindset and the thinking to help them actually deliver. But between the development team and the product owner, they determine what is delivered when. Right. Okay? So this is like, this is a crash course on Scrum, but like everything else here, right, we will practice it. I will raise this over and over as we work so that you know what it is. Every day we will have a daily stand-up or a daily Scrum for the squad that's on that day. So on Monday, when we have the front-end squad, the first 5 to 10 minutes will be just a stand-up. It will be a mock stand-up. Nobody's working on anything yet, so nobody has anything to say about what they're working on. But by Thursday, people should have stuff that they're like, okay, yeah, so since Monday I've worked on this, and this is the challenge I have. This is what's blocking me. Right? We will have a sprint planning tomorrow. Right? That's why we're going to go into Jira, and we're going to learn how to organize the work and what a user story is and all that. We're going to do that tomorrow. But throughout the remaining 7 weeks of this training, we're going to practice this agile processes in addition to the technology. So we're going to do the training and the practicing and all that in the context of an agile Scrum environment. Okay? So, any questions? Okay. So we're going to move to the next aspect. And here, I don't know, did everyone get an invite to GitHub? And has everyone installed Git?
Yeah, I just installed mine.
Yeah, I got an invite her, but I'm yet to come on.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the invite here.
Or rather,
Okay.
I just joined. I installed it earlier, but I just joined.
Okay, so please let's all look in our mail for an invite to GitHub. We will have an invite to join this organization called Software Development Training. And let's look for it and let's see if we can all accept that invite and join the organization right now, because we'll need it for this next session, or this next section. So let me just come here and see. Back here to the organization. Okay, I have 13 people who have joined. All right. So please, let's come in. Let's accept the invitation. And actually, I'm going to stop recording here.
Are you just sending it now?
I sent it already.